You on our virtual platform, we certainly would like for you to remember to keep your microphones muted when you are not wishing to speak. When you'd like to speak, please go ahead and unmute your line and then return to mute when you conclude. And as always, we will be actively monitoring the chat box and we'll use that to facilitate the meeting. So whenever you have a question, you can feel free to pose it in the chat or just use it to signify your desire to be recognized as we develop a queue when we have questions and discussion for our agenda items. To begin, I'd like for us to all who want to participate in our Pledge of Allegiance, and then I will go over the logistics for today's meeting again. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Did I hear a question or a comment? Okay, we will continue, and we'll move to agenda item number 2, which is the report of the chair. And as we move on with today's meeting, know that audio and video are being live streamed to our public on the COG website and through our YouTube account.
All right. I don't know why it does it. Every single.
We have a couple of announcements for today about upcoming activities, the first of which is a return to an in-person gathering of us all. The COG annual meeting, which will be on December 8th next month. We will be live and in person for our annual meeting luncheon, which will be held in downtown Washington, D.C. We strongly encourage all vaccinated members to attend for this once in a many months gathering of us in person. If you have not yet registered, please do so by visiting the COG website. And if you have any questions about participation in the meeting, please go ahead and contact Pat Warren. It's also bittersweet that we announce some upcoming retirements from the COG board. I'm sorry, from the region. We have Mark Jinks, the city manager from the city of Alexandria, and Chris Martino, the county manager from Prince William County, who both announced their plans to retire at the end of the year after long and distinguished public service careers and many contributions to the COG Chief Administrative Officers Committee, as well as to our region. And I would like to now invite Mayor Wilson and Chair Wheeler forward to recognize their respective chief executives of their community.
Wheeler, you want to go first?
I'd like to turn it over to Mayor Wilson.
Wilson, why don't you start, and I'll go after.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chair Wheeler. And we appreciate the opportunity to honor our outgoing city manager, Mark Jinks. We have the unenviable task right now as a city council of working to find a replacement who will certainly not fill his shoes, but work to succeed him as our city manager. You know, as the chairman mentioned, Mark has had a long and distinguished career, both in the city of Alexandria since 1999 and previously serving with our friends in Arlington County across 4 Mile Run for a number of years prior to that. Came to us as our CFO, later became deputy city manager, and was later succeeded to be our city manager. You know, Mark has really been a regional leader in addition to the work he's done in the city. Working with WMATA Finance, Joint Development, and as the chairman mentioned, leading in the regional CAOs group. And so we will certainly miss him. And I think we have never had a bigger champion for regional cooperation and understanding the power of what happens when our local governments work together to move policy forward. And so we will certainly miss him. We want to congratulate him on a well-deserved retirement. And I appreciate the COG taking this opportunity to recognize his regional cooperation and regional contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Wilson. Chair Wheeler.
Good, thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to be here today to be able to express our appreciation for Christopher Martino. You know, his career in public service spans 40 years. began in Rye, New York, as a controller, as well as a deputy finance commissioner in White Plains. And so when you hear that New York accent, you'll understand where it came from. And I can say that because I'm from New Jersey, so it's okay. And he came to Prince William County 26 years ago as a finance director, eventually deputy CXO, and has been CXO since 2016. He's been so instrumental in so many of the things of empowering our workforce, sound financial management policies, focusing on the board's goals, making sure that we maintain our AAA bond rating, working collaboratively across the region with, really keeping Prince William in touch with other jurisdictions, which we're really so grateful for. And I want to take a moment to just say that I am really personally grateful that Chris was in the position he was in. I came to office in January of 2020 with not having been an elected official. And I say this over and over, I was really grateful that we had a county government in place that was excellent with regards to emergency operations, was excellent with regard to pivoting when there was a lot of economic uncertainty. The employees through his leadership came together and filled a lot of different jobs, and he orchestrated that really well to make sure that everybody's job was filled in, and everybody, even if they were doing something different, was really successful at what they did. His office drove our vaccine and testing, our testing and our vaccine efforts really came out of our executive office, as well as emergency operations. And I'm really, really grateful that all that wonderful stuff was in place when I got here, and I could rely on county staff. You have no idea. So I'm sorry to see him go. I wish him the best in retirement. I'm kind of envious, but not that envious. And I know he will keep really busy with all the things that he has in the area with the children and everything else going on. And I wish him all the best of luck. He will be sorely missed in Prince William County.
Such heartfelt and gracious testimonials from the both of you. Thank you very much. As a representative of a neighboring and nearby jurisdiction, I can attest to the excellence that they have brought to their public service. And in the spirit of the cooperation and comedy that we all share in the region of Northern Virginia, there are no hard feelings over the staff that you've poached from Arlington County over the years. And hopefully you don't have any ill will for the staff that we have poached from you, but we will sorely miss you. And since both Mr. Martino and Mr. Jinks are on, I'd like to give them an opportunity if they'd like to say some brief words. Why don't we start with you, Mark, since Justin went first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. The last 44 years has just been absolutely terrific in working in the region. If we were in the COG boardroom, I could probably point to about a third of the pictures that are on that back wall of people that I've had the opportunity to work with. And what has really been great, and probably what had me stick around Northern Virginia for all my career, was the fact that the voters put forward and elected a great bunch of elected officials. And I've really learned from them, and it was really the staff, the elected officials pulling together that got things done. So I want to thank you all and your predecessors for providing the leadership that allows the staff and the leadership on the administrative level to succeed. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Martino.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Appreciate your comments, Chair Wheeler. Very humbling. Appreciate the entire board taking a few minutes to recognize Mark and me. I exchanged a few words with Mark a week or so back. We were reminiscing about, I think one of the first days on the job, I encountered Mark and we were working on the financing for the Newman's End Creek Regional Jail, joint venture between a number of the jurisdictions. And Mark's response was very amusing. We've been around a long time. When the bond transaction you worked on is paid off and we're no longer operating the facility. But, you can't lead in a jurisdiction in Northern Virginia without also becoming part of the region. One goes hand in glove with the other. And, on a daily basis, our staffs are interacting in so many different ways. And you're just drawn into caring a whole lot more about a whole lot more than when you're director of finance. You know, I was pretty comfortable being director of finance. And sometimes over the years, I thought I just should have stayed there. But you come to care about more than the balance sheet and the tax rate. And that's the issues that this board deals with, whether it's the environment or transportation, that knows no bounds. And it's been my pleasure to engage with the other staff throughout the region. I know Chuck Bean's been doing a great job with COG, and Stuart Friedberg welcomed me into the COG boardroom many years ago, and God bless Stuart. And I know Tom Gates has picked up the ball and running with it now. You know, talking about poaching people, Scott Boggs was only supposed to be borrowed for a short period of time, and lo and behold, now he's heading up many things for COG in the region. And thank you, Scott, for your the relationship that we've had. You know, so many things also, as Mark spelled out. I've left COG meetings and brought back to the county and represented them as my own great ideas, but you know, that's how it goes also. So let me just say, I very much appreciate my career, having the opportunity to get engaged and hopefully make a bit of a difference. And certainly my family has benefited from escaping from New York and ensconcing ourselves in Prince William County. Thank you all very much.
Thank you both. We very much value your service, and we wish you well in your retirement from public service, but we know the story is not yet finished on what you'll do next, so we'll be paying attention and wish you the best of luck and hope that you are entirely fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as we move from the bittersweet to the sweet, I would like to offer congratulations to a few of our fellow board members that recently were rewarded by their constituents with re-election to their offices. In Alexandria, Mayor Justin Wilson, City of Frederick Mayor Michael O'Connor, Greenbelt Mayor Emmett Jordan, and City of Fairfax Councilor David Snyder. Congratulations to all of you. We certainly appreciate your public service and look forward to our continued work together. Let's give them all a virtual and a real round of applause. Next, I would like to move on with our agenda, and what we will do is conduct our roll call. Monica Nunez, who has been monitoring the participant section of the WebEx, will complete the roll call to document your presence at today's meeting. Monica, the floor is yours.
For the District of Columbia, I have Beverly Perry. Is there anyone else from the district? From the state of Maryland, I have Reuben Collins, Thomasina Coates, Michael O'Connor, Joy Schaefer, Denise Mitchell, Robert Wu, Emmett Jordan, Craig Moe, Fariba Kathiri, Tara Jackson, Bridget Newton, and Kate Stewart. Is there anyone else from a Maryland jurisdiction? From Virginia, I have Justin Wilson, Christian Dorsey, David Meyer, Penny Gross, Rodney Lusk, David Snyder, Julie Briskman, Phyllis Randall, Mark Wolf, Ann Wheeler, and Andrea Bailey. Is there anyone else from Virginia? Thank you. That completes the roll, and we have a quorum to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Nunez. We will now proceed with agenda item number 3, which is our executive director's report. We'll turn it over to Mr. Chuck Bean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My written report begins on page 8 of the board packet. A couple of administrative announcements on upcoming committee meetings. COG's nominating committee. It will be on November 18th. That is chaired by COG Board Chair Robert White. Our legislative committee will be on December 16th. That committee is composed of the chairs or designates of the policy boards and policy committees, and that will be chaired by Christian Dorsey. Our audit committee is coming up on December 2nd. Thank you, Mayor Meyer, for chairing that committee. A note about appointments to COG boards and policy committees for 2022. Customarily, we've sent out a letter to the top elected official, mayor, chair, or equivalent, along with the board clerk. This year, we'll be sending out a link to a webpage to make those designations. We'll send out that link later this month, and we would ask jurisdiction leads to complete this in December where possible, and in early January when possible, particularly for the Virginia jurisdictions. Monica, if you could bring up the one slide deck, appreciate it. The region shaping planning work you've been doing these past 2 years has now come together. In 2019, you adopted the regional housing targets for the decade. In 2020, you endorsed a regional climate goal for 2030. And just last month, you approved land use optimization around high capacity transit station areas and also equity emphasis areas as key planning constructs through 2030. These four taken together, housing targets and climate targets with the high capacity transit EEAs form a unified planning work and will focus us for the next decade. Now that we have these elements in place, our staff is ready to support you, particularly as we lean into 2022 to put all this work together and into action. Happy to work that at least one action is well underway. Following your approval last month, we signed the paperwork with Amazon to receive the grant for the COG Housing Affordability Planning Grants Program. We expect to issue an RFP early in the new year. And as we look forward to fulfilling these two objectives, that is putting it all together and putting it into action, I personally would appreciate your advice and counsel about ideas to move this forward, be that presentations to your council or board of supervisors, putting it all together in one seminal document. Please give me a call with your advice. And in that regard, Nancy Navarro introduced two resolutions to the Montgomery County Council yesterday to adopt the two COG goals related to optimizing land use around high capacity transit and elevating equity emphasis areas. If staff could drop the link to those resolutions in Montgomery County, I would appreciate it. Councilmember Navarro spoke on last month's Thinking Regionally podcast with Robert McCartney on EEAs. And the second podcast will roll out next week on transit-oriented communities around high-capacity transit and features Chair Phyllis Randall. If staff could drop the link to the podcast, I'd appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report. Happy to answer questions. I have one thing I'd like to do. If we could take about 2 or 3 minutes, I would ask Kanti Srikanth to do something challenging but useful. And if he could provide an update on Metro in a minute or so, and then a minute or so on the infrastructure bill. And I think Mr. Srikanth has a document that we will also drop into the chat box. So Kanti.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. First, talking about the Metro Rail service disruption. So we staff here at COG have been working with WMATA and keeping up with their communications on the efforts and actions that are underway to bring back the Metro Rail service. COG also supports the MATOC organization, which has its own transit task force, and we've been participating in that as well. So what I have to share with you is really staff summary. As you are aware, since the October 12th derailment of Blue Line trains with the 7000 series rail cars, WMATA has had to stop using all of those rail cars. The root cause of the Blue train derailment is still under investigation by National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. and the agency has not yet named what they believe the issue to be. But in the interim, WMATA has proactively been working and taken a couple of actions to restore this service. One of the actions they took was developing and presenting a plan to the Metro Rail Safety Commission to test these 7000 series rail cars to validate that these rail cars are safe to return to service. The second action that they took, or they are working on, is creating a plan to guide how, once these rail cars have been validated to be safe, how they will actually be implemented and maintained in service. So the good news is WMATA's plan on testing these rail cars has been approved by the Metro Rail Safety Commission. In fact, the 7000 series rail cars are currently running on the Metro Rail system in 8-car train lengths without passengers. And they will run at least for a minimum period of 12 days, and there will be tests and measurements done, and they will go from there to determine if these vehicles or if these rail cars are indeed safe and service worthy. In another effort, WMATA had been working, and they have now been able to make much progress on bringing in some of the older 2000, 3000, and 6000 series cars out of the storage. Once they bring them out, it has to be serviced, inspected, and readied for operations. That has been done. So all of this has led to frequency of rail services improving from 15 minutes to 12 minutes on the red line, from 30 minutes to 20 minutes on the green and yellow line. Blue, orange, and silver continue to be at 30, but we expect more rail cars as they become available to be put on those lines and those frequencies to pick up as well. That's a quick update on the Metro Rail actions to restore service. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Shrikant, thank you very much. Thank you also, Mr. Bean. If you have any questions for either Conti or Chuck, please put them in the chat, but we're going to move on in the agenda. But we certainly recognize the importance of all of the planning items and the frameworks that Chuck presented, as well as the essentialness of Metro as our region continues a return to what is our new normal. Next on our agenda, we have an opportunity to consider any proposed amendments to the agenda. Are there any proposed amendments to our agenda today? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Shrikant, yes.
I was going to provide a brief update, if I could be brief, on
I'm sorry. Yes.
U.S. federal. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
So members of the board are familiar with the U.S. Congress's action this past Friday, November 5th, when the House of Representatives approved the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. We like acronyms, II. The bill proposes a federal investment totaling $1.2 trillion in several sectors and over the next 5 to 8 years. The same bill was already passed by the Senate back in August. So this means the bill is now ready to proceed to the President's desk for signature. There are several features on this bill that are unprecedented, including the amount of funds and the wide variety of infrastructure sectors in which it is proposed to be invested, and the focus on resiliency and equities, two of the region's priorities. The bill itself is about 2,700 pages long. It's been examined and understood, so staff's understanding is evolving. And we will try to keep pace with what we learn more about it. And Chuck will be sharing a very high-level preliminary summary that staff developed with you in the chat. I'll make a few general observations. The first and foremost is that this is not a one-time stimulus funding. Rather, it is an ongoing programmatic addition of funds that will become available to the region over the next at least 8 years, and some more money over the shorter period of time. The second, the 1.2 trillion is not all new money. About 650 billion of that funds various existing federal programs. All of those programs now have more money. So that's a good news. 550 billion is in new funding, and that will flow through federal agencies through either existing programs or new programs will have to be promulgated. Actions that we can take to mitigate and adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change is a major theme in the programs, as is equity. So there are opportunities for this region, and they are significant, and it is of a scale not previously seen. The opportunities are there for individual actions at the state level, local level, and for collective actions at the regional level, which means that every member jurisdiction and all the state agencies will have to get prepared to develop actionable plans and having the resources to implement them individually and collectively. So the memo has breakdown on some of the new funds on the sector, so I will not go over it. There was some preliminary analysis that estimates collectively the region is likely to receive $20 billion in new funding through existing programs. This is not something that they have to compete with. This will come to them through existing formula. The District of Columbia is estimated to get about $3 billion, Maryland about $7.6 billion, Virginia about $9.7 billion. In addition to these minimum guaranteed amounts, there will be at least $30 billion in new federal grants that the region and its members can go after individually or collectively. So that's as quick as and as brief of a summary I could provide. And the memo, Chuck has dropped it into the chat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Srikanth. When you're talking about over $1 trillion, you can't be too brief, for sure. All right, so I didn't hear any proposed amendments to the agenda. I just want to reconfirm that before moving on. Next, we'll have consideration of the minutes from our October 13th COG board meeting. Can I have a motion? I see Ms. Gross. You're muted.
I am. There we go. Move approval of the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Are there any abstentions? You can also put those in the chat. And are there any nay votes? Therefore, our minutes from October 13th are approved. Moving next in our agenda, we have agenda item number 6, consideration of the consent agenda. We do have one resolution on the consent agenda today, which acknowledges receipt of the COG 2021 contract list. You can find the details on page 17 of your board packet. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Gross moves approval.
Thank you, Supervisor Gross. Is there a second?
Second.
Mitchell, College Park.
Multiple second. I heard Ms. Mitchell from College Park. Are there any abstentions? Any nay votes? Therefore, the consent agenda is approved. Thank you all very much. We'll now move on to item number 7, and I will invite COG Secretary Treasurer Rodney Lusk and COG Chief Financial Officer Julie Mussug to brief us on the fiscal year 2021 year-end financial report. I think I'll turn it over first to Supervisor Lusk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The year-end fiscal report for fiscal year 2021 is in your board package starting on page 21, showing the results for the fiscal year that ended on June 30th, 2021. So this is an interim, unaudited report prepared by management. And as you are aware, the audited financial reports and statements will be presented to the board in January. I have reviewed this financial information with Ms. Mussog, our Chief Financial Officer here at COG, and I'm pleased to say that the fiscal year end was a very positive one, with some undesignated funds available for future use. Of special note is the Cooperative Purchasing Program, which was able to fully fund itself and even generate a small amount of additional funding for the first time in the history of this program's operation. We are in a very good place due to the leadership of Chuck Bean and Julie Mussog and their team, and I want to thank them for their diligence and also for their stewardship with our budget and our financial issues. So having said that, Mr. Chairman, I will now turn this over to Julie Mussog to provide additional background and details on the budget. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lusk. Julie.
Thank you. Good afternoon. If you turn to page 24 in the board package, you can see that for the year ending June 30, 2021, The net surplus from operations is $1.8 million. $1.3 million of the surplus is primarily a timing issue where we have collected and recognized funds in advance of expenses being recognized, and these are restricted funds for specific program expenses. The rest of the remainder of $500,000, those would be considered unrestricted funds that in part will be used to fund the farm program for fiscal year 2022. The increase in undesignated fund balance was driven by both cost containment efforts and lower spend due to COVID restrictions. Operating revenue and expenses tracked lower than the FY21 budget. Lower federal and state revenue is driven by lower spend in transportation planning board work program and commuter connections. These are both cost reimbursement projects, so the year-to-date expenses are also lower than budget. Commuter connections spend on advertising is significantly lower year over year due to COVID-19 and is driving the decrease in other direct program expense. Lower than budgeted salaries was also driven by turnover, some planned delays in hire, and then rehires at lower rates when there were vacancies. Subrecipient pass-through funds are $1.3 million less than the amount budgeted. Pass-through funds for a $2.7 million repower project budgeted for FY21 have not been received yet, but the project was approved by the funding agency, and we expect that most of this revenue will be recognized in FY 2022. This was partially offset by receiving $1.9 million of UASI funds that were not budgeted. Turning to page 25, you can see the statement of net position as of June 30, 2021 shows an overall increase in total liabilities and net assets of $3.6 million. The increase reflects the impact of increases in designated project fund balances of $1.8 million, as well as $500,000 in undesignated funds due to the net income over the last 12 months. The $1 million increase in non-current liabilities represents the difference between estimated and actual indirect costs. In some years, the difference is a receivable, in others, it's a liability, and adjustments are made to subsequent indirect cost rates to make up the difference over time. An additional $0.3 million is due to the increase in the annual leave liability, as leave rates were much lower than usual due to COVID. Overall, COG remains financially healthy, with board designated capital and operating reserves funded at 100% of policy with balances of $5.2 million each. And I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our CFO?
With no questions, I'll turn it back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mussuk. Thank you, Mr. Lusk. And certainly it is a great position to be in, the healthy balance sheet that you just outlined, given that COG does not have the opportunity to plus up its sources, its revenues during this period as perhaps our municipalities or our states have. Otherwise, very healthy financial position, and we thank you for the work in relaying that to us today. We'll now move on to the next agenda item, which is number 8, where we are going to welcome the ConnectedDMV President and CEO, Stu Solomon, and their Chief Strategy Officer, Matt Erskine, to brief the board on a new partnership and a playbook working to develop growth and equity for our region. So if we have them ready, I'd now like to welcome Mr. Solomon.
Thank you, Chairman Dorsey, and it's an honor to be with this group again today. And today we'd like to talk about the award that we've received from Commerce and how our partnership together will help bring good results for our region. So thank you for the time today. Chuck Bean has been a great partner with the entire COG team for ConnectedDMV. Mr. Dorsey and Robert White, both of you very instrumental in the very foundation of ConnectedDMV and the ability to bring cross-sector leaders from the region together for our regional good. So thank you for that and for the rest of the COG organization. So today we will talk a little bit about how some of these opportunities that are in front of us can be brought to fruition and how we can get more, our fair share or more of some of the assets that are being deployed. Because our region has the wherewithal to do really good things and really hard things for home and beyond. So Matt and I will discuss the award a bit, and we'll talk about the broader framework that award fits within. So if we can go to the next slide. As a brief reminder, ConnectedDMV is a nonprofit. So we are a 501c3 organization, and we're here to deliver regional good. We work in a cross-sector manner. So all of our work basically is at the table co-equally with government, industry, academia, community, and philanthropy. And so all of those groups are represented in all of our initiatives at ConnectedDMV. Again, everyone has a co-equal seat at the table as we contemplate how we can do better within our region. We've been at this for a couple of years. And again, all of our work centers, as this picture shows, at this intersection of a strong economy. How do we build economic renewal and a prosperous future for our region? And social equity. How do we do these things responsibly? We don't believe either one of these can be done independently. They can only be done together. And so if you go to the next, a couple of weeks ago, Secretary Gina Raimondo announced a $1.1 million award to ConnectedDMV and our partners. COG was a key partner with us in that bid. And this bid, which we'll talk more about in detail, Matt will walk us through some of the really interesting aspects of this. But this was really the first time that we know of that our region came together across sectors and across geographies to submit a request to the federal government for us to make this region stronger and better. So the equity and growth playbook sits at the heart of this award. And so we're excited that the region is working together. You do this through COG, but having the other sectors also now working together in a collaborative fashion, I think is beginning to yield some exciting results. Even things that Conti was just speaking about, I think we'll see some very huge opportunities that collectively we can pursue together. So on the next slide, just a quick walk back through how we got here. In March of 2020, we launched a COVID-19 Strategic Renewal Task Force. We did that with COG and some other partners. The objective of that task force was to drive collaboration to help us to get to a better place when we come out of COVID than where we were when we went in. And so this task force focused exclusively on long-term initiatives that would make our region stronger. The group met for about 14 months, evaluated a series of strategic initiatives, advanced a number of those, and those are being actioned today. Things like the Pandemic Center that's currently being implemented in Montgomery County and other initiatives that we'll speak about shortly. 50 leaders from across the region came together to do this, again, across all sectors, met for 14 months. And at the end of those 14 months, the conclusion by the regional leaders was that this was interesting for the episode of COVID, but we need an enduring means to work together cross-sector. So we created the DMV Regional Congress to provide an enduring means for 70 or so leaders across all sectors to convene quarterly to really drive strategic initiatives and equitable growth. And so that Congress is in place. It has met once. We'll drop into the chat here a little more about that for those that are interested in reading. There are 18 regional organizations that sit at the core of this regional Congress. And those regional organizations give us the reach to all of the workers and all of the communities here within Greater Washington. As part of that, we created an initiative last year called REDS, Regional Economic Development Strategy, you see towards the top of the wheel. That really brought the economic development leaders from across the region together to look at what would be possible for equitable growth. We had a great year of collaboration. At the end of that year, we moved into phase two. Phase two basically says, how do we create the model where our region, instead of competing at times internally within our own jurisdictions and industries, how can we look externally to bigger opportunities and compete against Austin and Boston and Silicon Valley and Paris and the like? And so we begin to set our sights on some of the large scale opportunities that during this time of transition could be made available. So REDS 2.0 develops a framework for that collaboration to really institutionalize that within our region for the pursuits where larger collaboration makes sense. So REDS 2.0 has just gotten underway, and it's within that very context that we bid for this award from Commerce, which Matt will talk about here in a second. We also then created an entity called We Are Greater Washington. And again, we can drop more information on this, but this was a program office, if you will, a pursuit office, an office where our region could come together and drive tangible program pursuits to win net new business in responsible ways for our region. So it's great to have the idea, but if we can't action it, then the idea basically falls on the table. And so some of the things, even in the infrastructure bill that Conti just referenced, are pursuits that we're aligning the region together with you to go pursue aggressively. So we have a program office now created through ConnectedDMV and our partners. We have a framework with the economic development community. We have a regional and growth playbook that we're now to go develop together as part of the Commerce Award. And so if we flip forward one more page, all of this is to create a stronger region. We believe that our efforts together result in strong growth and equitable growth. And we believe that we've got an opportunity to really create a brand for the region, if you will, that supports the individual brands of our jurisdiction, but also enables us to compete on the world stage. We believe that in doing that, if we do it right, as we do it right, that all of our communities will prosper and that we can address many of the disparities that have existed in our region for many, many years. So on our team, we say one region, one team, one plan, one result. That's our mantra at ConnectedDMV for a stronger DMV. So with that, let me turn it over to Matt and to talk about the award.
Great, thank you, Stu, very much. And thank you to Chairman Dorsey and the COG board, and to Chuck and the staff. Good afternoon, great to be with you all. I am excited to share with you more details regarding our region's recent EDA grant award for the DMV Equity and Growth Playbook. As Stu mentioned, this is a big deal. It's the first truly broad-scale regional EDA grant award for our region in recent memory, and at $1.14 million, a larger than typical award from EDA for this kind of work. It's very exciting. As you can see, the specific objectives for the DMV Regional Equity and Growth Playbook are first to create a strategic unified regional framework and collaboration model across the regional organizations and the public, private, academic, and community sectors here in the DMV. Secondly, to enable collaborative opportunities and more effectively deployed resources for development and investment that will grow quality jobs. Third, aligning the region on a single integrated plan that identifies desired outcomes, impacts, and metrics for addressing our regional infrastructure, economic growth, and social equity needs. And finally, providing strategies, methods, toolkits to deliver these outcomes and enable our region to operate at its full potential. We can go to the next slide, please. So for the project, you'll see here, ConnectedDMV serves as the lead grantee, but really together with our co-grantees, the Federal City Council, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, of course, and the Consortium of Universities of the Washington Metropolitan Area. That's the core team. We also, as you can see, will involve and work very closely with all of the Greater Washington regional organizations listed here, and will leverage the larger universe of the DMV Regional Congress stakeholders and partners that Stu just outlined. The cross-sector names on this page are representational for the DMV Regional Congress. As Stu mentioned earlier, the Congress comprises 70 cross-sector members from all across our regions and across those four sectors. And in fact, the work over the past 18 months of the COVID-19 Strategic Renewal Task Force, and now the Congress, and the Regional Economic Development Strategy work that Stu just laid out, it helped prepare and really position our region to apply and win this award. You could move to the next slide, please. So the team has developed a rigorous work plan for the Regional Equity and Growth Playbook project. We anticipate that the project will run through the end of next year, so the end of calendar year 22. It's important to note that the playbook work will begin with an assessment of current regional capabilities and gaps, as well as concurrent stakeholder workshops and listening sessions to gather input from across the region to gain a solid understanding of the landscape, the perspectives, the needs, and opportunities. resulting in some key deliverables at the end, some tangible deliverables. We'd also like to point out that we will be working closely with COG, especially with regards to the equity emphasis areas and the great work that has gone into that for COG. And we will be developing an online portal that will promote transparency and accountability, keep the region updated on the work, and we'll be developing an online metrics dashboard, what we're calling our DMV Atlas, which will enable us to measure our progress, to keep us accountable, to really focus on moving those metrics in the right direction, and quite frankly, the right metrics. So we are excited to be providing that for the region. And so we are excited to move ahead. We're excited to be working with COG and our other partners, and we'll be happy to take questions later with regard to the playbook. Thank you.
I think maybe if we can mention very, very briefly, you see these initiatives listed on this slide here. We have already submitted together as a region for Build Back Better, a large-scale quantum innovation proposal. We're waiting to hear next month the results from that, but that is to build out a regional cluster, an ecosystem, if you will, for quantum innovation. If we think about the benefits we have in cybersecurity in our region already, it's large scale, but we kind of backed into it as a region. This says, let's get in front of the next one that's much, much bigger, and let's plan for that methodically and have our region be the home base for the country as in our quantum pursuits. And similarly on climate and hydrogen, we have a major climate initiative that happens to align directly with the infrastructure bill that is up for signage right now. And while everyone else was focused on electrification, which we fully support, a year ago, our group together decided that looking at these hard to decarbonize industries would be very appropriate for us as a region to do. So hydrogen provides billions of dollars of opportunity for our region as we think about the infrastructure and innovation that needs to come together. Some city is going to be the hub in our country for hydrogen development, and we believe that our city, Greater Washington, should be that place. Pandemic prevention, Angela Navarro, the team at Montgomery County, both in council and in the executive's office, have been instrumental in this, as has the rest of the region. And the notion here is to build a pandemic prevention center and capability to get in front of the next pandemic and to have stockpiles of medical countermeasures at the ready when an outbreak occurs. And then lastly, we're working on developing a large-scale high-end apprenticeships that certainly recognize and support entry-level jobs for typical wage jobs, but the focus of our initiative is to target high-wage jobs and say some of the same talent that's trapped in certain communities, that we want to develop that talent to be able to achieve the highest levels out in industry and beyond through an immersion program for apprenticeships. And our community colleges in the region are helping kind of at the base to come together to define the details of what this apprenticeship program would look like. So that's a couple. I know Chuck had dropped in the note that they could provide more information on some of these, but these are the types of large-scale transformation initiatives that bring equitable growth to our region, but also tremendous upside potential in this innovative environment that we find ourselves. So with that, Chairman, I will turn it back to you and any questions that you may have of us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon and Mr. Erskine. We do have a few minutes for questions. I don't see any in the chat, so I'll first entertain any questions from members from Maryland. About the District of Columbia. Commonwealth of Virginia.
This is Penny Gross.
Supervisor Gross, please.
Thank you. Could you elaborate more on the apprenticeships piece that you've presented? At the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, we've been working on workforce issues for a long time, and business community keeps telling us that we need apprenticeships, but I don't find that they're really willing to step up and do the apprenticeships. And then, of course, there's the entire piece of apprenticeships for those who are more in the trades. Could you elaborate more on what you see as the future for apprenticeships? It's a good idea, but it doesn't seem to have gotten a lot of traction. Thank you.
Thank you much. And yes, for apprenticeships, as we looked at it for the region, there are lots of good internships, some good apprenticeships as well. And as the region historically has taken this on, industry tends to pick up 1 and 2 people at a time, and they pick them up from a smattering of different places. Those people enter industry and they're not very well prepared for the job at hand, and the training they get at industry doesn't necessarily advance them well. So while the intention has been good, we think the results have been very mixed on how these efforts have kind of gone in this region and across the country. The notion here is very different. The notion here is to take a 3-year immersion program and identify, people that have an aptitude and desire to do high-end professional services jobs and immerse them for 3 years so that when they come to the job market, if you will, that they're more prepared than who these high-end professional services firms historically have hired. We can't do that in a summer. We believe it needs to be a 3-year immersion program and that they need to come together as cohorts. Our plan is to have them come together and do actual work, delivering regional projects for the regional good in the same methods and tools and methodologies that those professional services companies would use. So that in 3 years, while they would start at a good salary, they would be at $70,000+ salaries within 3 years, and performing or outperforming the candidates that tend to come from the traditional places that these firms hire. Now, so to make it work, industry hasn't invested at the level we believe they need to. To make that work, we believe that large-scale philanthropy has to play a key role. So it aligns with their mission, and large-scale philanthropy has been certainly contributing to apprenticeships and internships, but they have not had a mechanism where they can do this at scale in industrial strength models that produce consistent supply. One more point I would make is in my old role, we hired 1,000 people a year into professional services, and we could never get enough of the mix, the type of people, the diversity that we wanted to hire into our organization. That's true with all the professional services organizations. So we do believe that demand is not a problem for a long, long, long time, that if we can produce supply, quality supply for the job market in an industrial strength fashion, we can accelerate a lot of the talent that is at community colleges and other places right now that doesn't find itself in the traditional kind of high-end, higher ed environments, and get them ready for that marketplace in 3 years. So that is what we're working towards. It's complicated. We have right now the co-chairs of this initiative and include Felicia Williams at Prince George's Community College and Kress out at Nova, and now UDC is beginning to integrate with us as well. And we've got the Economic Club also co-chairing to represent broadly industry. So we're laying out the detailed vision and strategy right now to go get that funded. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
That's
No,
okay.
thank you.
No
That
problem.
was a much more robust answer than I expected. Thank you very much.
Well, all are satisfied then. So the final question on this will come from Supervisor Andrea Bailey, and I'll need a succinct response to whatever the question is. Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I just think this is just a brilliant vision for our jurisdictions. But the question I had is related to your pandemic preventions. And what, if you could, can you give us just like briefly targeted areas that you're looking at in terms of proactive, moving forward proactively for pandemic preventions?
Yeah, so for pandemic prevention, we are targeting specifically human monoclonal antibodies, developing stockpiles of those so that you can immediately respond once a disease breaks out. The current model waits and then addresses diseases after they happen. We know the top 100 diseases that could cause the next pandemic. We can prepare solutions today for that. So the center is very focused on that as the launch initiative and getting in front of the next pandemic, not responding after it occurs.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I'll just say, as a commentary from someone who was in on some of the earlier conversations around Connected DMV, it's so thrilling to see how it's evolved into such a broad and substantive and, to my mind, meaningful scope of work. And certainly growth and innovation and change can likely typically leave people left behind. And while we don't necessarily solve it by planning for inclusivity and equity, there's no possible way that you are going to bring everybody along if you don't name it and plan for it. So I very much thank you for that work. Thank you for securing the funding to robustly build out the equity work within the overall body of work. And we thank you, Stu and Matt, for the presentation. We're now going to move on to the next item on the agenda, and we're going to have an update on the 2020 census and a report for our region. So we're going to invite Director of Community Planning and Services, Paul Desjardins, and Senior Regional Planner, Greg Goodwin, to brief us on COG's analysis of the first tranche of data from the 2020 census. Mr. Desjardins, I'll turn it over to you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Very mindful of time here, so my colleague and I will go very quickly through this. I will add, in your packet today, there is a draft report with some more detailed findings. There's some additional narrative and findings we'll be adding to that. And I do see Supervisor Bailey here. We will be chatting with this in more detail Friday at the Human Services Committee. So next slide, please, Monica. Very quickly, we're all familiar, the census is mandated by the Constitution. It's also a snapshot every 10 years of our population that does help inform each of you as policymakers. We're mindful that the census as a product has changed, but there is still information in there that is important. And we'll focus a little bit on the amount, location, and composition of what is shown in the data. The last thing I would point out, that last bullet, is tremendous kudos to each of you and your complete count committees. The census was completed at the height of the start of the pandemic. It's probably a bit of a redundant statement there, but I don't think everyone knows what I mean. Okay, next slide, please. Very quickly, and then I will turn to Mr. Goodwin, who will walk you through this. Our region has grown very steadily, more than 660,000 people in the last 10 years. Strong growth throughout the region, principally in Loudoun, Prince George's, Montgomery, and the district. An interesting statistical finding is we are now predominated by people of color. The white population comprises less than half of the region's total for the first time. The district, Maryland, and Prince William County are among the most diverse jurisdictions in the entire country. Some very interesting, very important statistics there on diversity. Next slide, please. And then very quickly, not a surprise, two jurisdictions, the outer suburbs have the highest share of young people, school-age children. And another interesting statistic, and Mr. Goodwin will touch on this, is that the average household size that plummeted in the 70s has actually begun to creep up a bit since the turn of the century. So very mindful of, is that a short-term or long-term trend? And with that, turn to my colleague, Mr. Goodwin, and then we'll be available to go very quickly if there are any questions. Greg?
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. I would just like to say that I'm going to move through this presentation fairly fast. So what this slide is suggesting that as a region, we have approached and have reached a population of 5.7 million people in 2020. And this is a growth of about 660,000 people, or 13% since 2010. And this was the greatest absolute increase in population since the 1950s. Overall, our population is very similar and very comparable to other regions, especially Miami and Atlanta. For Miami, they had a growth of 10%, and Atlanta had a growth of 15%. Next slide, please. This table shows the absolute and percentage growth for each of the COG member jurisdictions between 2010 and 2020. Again, I will note at the very bottom, a growth of 660,000 people and a growth of 13%. This table is included in your draft report in your board packet today for further review. Next slide, please. So for the pie chart on the right,
The district is home to about 1 of every 8 residents, while the shares of the region's population in the Maryland suburbs and Northern Virginia are nearly equal. And for the pie chart on the right, more than half of the region's population resides in the inner jurisdictions of Montgomery, Prince George's, and Fairfax County, and the cities of Falls Church and Fairfax. The central jurisdictions of the District of Columbia, Arlington, and Alexandria comprise 19% of the population, and the remaining 24% residing in our outer jurisdictions, Charles, Frederick, Loudoun, Prince William counties, and the cities of Manassas and Manassas Park. Next slide, please. Just want to draw your attention to the stack chart onto the left. Across the COG region, approximately 42% of the residents identified as white in the 2020 census, and this is compared to 52% in the 2010 census. Black or African American residents account for the next largest racial group at about 26%. But if you look at the stack graph on the far right for Northern Virginia, Black residents are only 12% of the population. Again, looking at the regional stack bar chart, approximately 12% of the region identifies as Asian, while 10% identifies as being of 2 or more races, and another 10% as some other race. And in just a short moment, I will also look at the Hispanic and the Latino population as well. But as we all know, this is not a race, but is an ethnicity. But people who identify as Hispanic or Latino are included in the race tables above, and we will talk about the region's ethnic background breakdown in a few upcoming slides. Next slide, please. So these following maps show the relative share by census tract of the population by race. The darker shadings indicate a higher proportion of the population, and they're not the actual numbers. So looking at the map on the left, for the non-Hispanic whites, remain the largest demographic group in the COG region with a population of about 2.3 million people. This was the only racial group with a population decline in the region from 2010 to 2020, decreasing by approximately 3% over the last 10 years. The map on the right shows the location of the region's Black or African American residents, principally in Prince George's and Charles counties, and the eastern portions of Montgomery, Fairfax, and Prince William counties. Next slide, please. So for the chart on the left, the Asian population is the 3rd largest race group in the COG region at 16.6%. And as the map shows, significant Asian communities are in Fairfax, Loudoun, and Montgomery counties. Now turning to the ethnic population of Hispanic and Latino seen on the map on the right, this group grew by 39%, or more than 287,000 people since 2010. And these communities can be seen throughout the region, but particularly in Montgomery, Prince George's, Fairfax, and Prince William counties. Next slide, please. This chart shows the 2010 to 2020 population change of the Hispanic and non-Hispanic populations by COG major jurisdictions, ranked by the greatest local increase in Hispanic population. Growth in the number of Hispanic and Latino residents comprised the majority of population change in Prince George's and Montgomery counties and Prince William County, with Manassas and Manassas Park. It's also important to note that the top 5 jurisdictions shown in this chart comprise 80% of the region's 2020 population. Next slide, please. As we turn to diversity, I would just like to point out that for the 2020 census, the Census Bureau defines diversity as the representation and relative size of different racial and ethnic groups within a population. For COG's analysis of the 2020 census, we examined the Bureau's diversity index. And as you will see on this slide, all 24 of COG member jurisdictions are ranked by the diversity index from the highest to the lowest. As a region, our score was 73.2%, and nearly all of the COG member jurisdictions met or exceeded the national score of 61.1. Next slide, please. When we look at states with the highest diversity index, the Census Bureau determined that Maryland and the District of Columbia are among the 10 most diverse states in the nation at 4th and 5th. Virginia is ranked closely at 13th. Next slide, please. So for counties with the highest diversity index, out of the 3,100 or so county and county equivalents in the United States, Prince William County was the only COG member county in the top 10. Next slide. So, as I had said, or as Paula might have mentioned, as mandated by the Constitution, the census redistricting data provides counts of the population above and below 18 years of age for legislative redistricting. These data also provide an initial insight into the region's overall age composition, showing the shares of voting age compared to the school age populations. This chart shows the variation in population by these broad age groups for the region, central, inner, and outer jurisdiction. According to the data, 78% of the region's population is 18 years or older. But what is noteworthy is the variation by subregion, particularly in the outer suburbs where more than 1 in 4 persons is below 18 years or school age. The next slide, please. This chart shows the 50-year trend in the average household size or persons per housing unit. As you can see, the region's household size plunged dramatically during the 1970s and continued to decline slowly throughout the end of the century. Since 2000, average household size has been increasing slightly for each census, reflecting the growing diversity of our population in more multi-generational households. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'd like to now turn this back over to Paul for any final comment.
Thank you, Greg. No additional comments. Again, Greg and I are here, happy to entertain any questions you might have from any of the board members. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. You covered a lot of essential information in a very, very efficient amount of time. So don't see any questions in the chat box. So we'll again move by jurisdiction and this time start with the District of Columbia. Any questions from members from the district? Okay, moving next to Commonwealth of Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions. This is Chair Randall, but that was fascinating. And it's going to be, I think, so useful for all of us for a myriad of different reasons. So thank you. That was well done. And we have access to this presentation. So thank you so much. I actually was the head of our committee in Loudoun County, and I have not seen the information put together so completely and succinctly anywhere before. So thank you so much for that.
Amen. Amen. Any other questions, comments from members of from the Commonwealth? Okay, and how about from Maryland? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Desjardins, we appreciate it. I know this will not be the last time that we hear from you as subsequent tranches of data are released from the census that give us more of an insight into the circumstances of residents of our region. We'll take other looks and figure out what's useful for us to chew over as a region. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
We'll next move to item number 11. Item number 10 on our agenda. And for this, we are going to take a look at regional efforts to address stigma associated with mental health. And we're joined here by Human Services Policy Committee Chair Andrea Bailey, who will brief us on that committee's focus to help the region address mental health stigma. There's actually no action item on this today, but Supervisor Bailey will also share a draft resolution, which is included on page 63 of the board packet, that the policy committee would like for this board to consider at its January meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to bring forth this presentation. This year, the Human Services Policy Committee focused on mental health and the stigma thereof for 2021. And it gives me great pleasure to let you know, next slide, please, that our focus, there were 4 focuses, and I'm going to start with the first, which was childhood development, and early interventions. And as we invited several subject matter experts and guests to address each one of these items, we garnered a plethora of information to go forth, as Mr. Chairman had said, in reference to the resolution. So as you know, the pandemic and systematic racism and the struggle with the economy has caused a disproportionate toll on all of our families, and just widening the disparity gaps and putting us more at stress.
So they don't want to vote on this until next time. That's cool.
Chair Randall, if you can mute your line, please.
Thank you. Therefore, there's been an increased number of uninsured children and negatively affecting their care, their health care, not just their physical health care, but long-term health care, specifically mental health care. And so with that specific session, we talked about strategies. And so there are 5 strategies that we focused on. One was coverage, providing continuous coverage from birth to 5 years of age. Payment and finances, so to incentivize coordinated care, increase payment rates for mental health services, which is very important, not just with our adult, but with our youth and our senior citizens, and providing waivers and amending plans to expand excessive mental health services. Linkage to promote health, to provide mental health services in non-traditional settings, like the schools and primary care, but specifically daycare, which is an opportunity with us coming out of COVID. And then expanding home visits, flexibility in telehealth, and extensive programs, which have become increasingly popular because we are in COVID, not being able to go to the doctor's appointments, but the telehealth piece was very important. So responding to the pandemic with racist policies, wanted to we can focus clearly on the designs that meets the needs of children and families of color disproportionately, and to offer more support to the family in a holistic way, and to serve our children who are suffering from anxieties and families that are in need. Next slide, please. We had an opportunity to invite our own Chair Randall to come and talk because of her professionalism, her expertise, her craft in mental health. And she focused on substance dependency. And Chair Randall, as you know, is the chair of Loudoun County. But here's what she provided for us. She talked about experiential and professional knowledge of substance abuse, really understanding what is substance abuse. She talked about the addiction is mainly a brain disease. It changes the chemical neurotransmitters in the brains, and it can no longer function without those substances in the brain. And so she talked more about we need to treat addiction, no matter the substance, no matter who you are, the race, income, gender, or otherwise. We need to really focus on the treatment of the addiction. The notion of cross addiction. People will change drugs based on what they can get. We must go after the addiction, not the drug. And she was adamant about that because oftentimes in our treatment, we go to understand what the drug is rather than what the addiction is. The stigma of addiction is starting to lessen, but we have a long way to go, just really understanding what the stigma is and where the addiction comes from. The strategies that she offered was lowering the stigma of substance abuse. And that makes it easier for people to come and get treatment, and to continue to share strategies to address substance dependency as it relates to COVID recovery, which is when you think about our region, we have a high degree of opioid addiction here in our region. Next slide, please. The next session that we focused on was housing and homelessness, and this was an extension of our last year 2020 focus as it relates to homelessness. And we talked about supportive housing and reducing homelessness, psychiatric hospitalization, crisis care, substance use, reincarceration, and increases, my allergies are bothering me, pardon me,
increases the good things as it relates to mental health and the quality of life. And what that means in its entirety is there are other opportunities when we talk about addressing homelessness as it relates to crisis care. And so we need to focus on the communities of color and the disproportionate of supportive housing within our jurisdictions. Possible strategies: increase supportive housing with long-term care coordination regionally. So one of the examples that we talked about, examples within our jurisdictions and the things that we were doing in our jurisdictions to address critical care and mental health. And so one of the examples that I'd like to offer from Prince William County is that we're focusing on the crisis receiving and stabilization services as it relates to services and goals and programming containing with different services or wraparound services relating to not just clinical, but psychoeducational, psychosocial, relaxation, case management, psychiatric, recreational, and physical health. So the wraparound services as it relates to care for mental health. Staffed by multidisciplinary teams to be able to coordinate those services as it relates primarily to behavioral health in our communities. Some of the CRC services include helping individuals avoid inpatient hospitalization, meaning that if the need is greater, having a separate place to go and heal other than the hospitals. We've identified that in the hospitals, there's not necessarily a focused area where a person can check in to a hospital and get the care. And so we're focusing not just on the hospitals, but also reducing incarceration rates when a person has an episode within our communities and having a place to go to heal. Coordination of mental health, substance abuse, and medical services are very important. So having wraparound services such as a pharmacy on site to align with the services that the individual is receiving. So that's just an example. Next slide, please. Wanted to share with you an example of a crisis receiving center as it relates to no wrong door for behavioral health crises. And as you can see from this slide, it focuses on the patient in its entirety. So on the right hand, you'll see vision and community services and urgent care as it relates to finding a home or housing assistance for those individuals, peer support, pharmacy, and of course, transportation, mobile crisis is very, very important. So with that, I wanted to say that our committee is looking at 3 different areas that we will talk about in our last session to bring forth to you a resolution as it relates to mental health. And those areas, as you can see here, are enhance awareness, so develop communication strategies to combat mental health stigma and to promote mental health wellness throughout our communities, not just to a sector. And the second one, access to care. Again, to break down the barriers to care to ensure all residents have access to resources to achieve full and holistic mental health wellness. And then thirdly, racial equity. Support culturally competent providers from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds to address cultural stigma associated with mental illness. And so we believe that this session this year for 2021 had to focus on mental health as it related to COVID, the COVID era, and us coming out of the COVID era to heal holistically, regionally, jurisdictionally. So, Mr. Chair, that is my story. I'm sticking to it and I'm open for questions.
Supervisor Bailey, thank you so very much for that deep insight into the work of your committee and for previewing the resolution that the board will have to consider in January. I'd like to invite conversation on this. I expect that there will be a lot, and we'll start with members from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Mr. Chairman?
Chair Randall, since you were cited in this presentation, I would expect that we'd hear from you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Andrea, you just killed that presentation.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Really, really good. You're ready to go get licensed and start hanging your shingle out and practicing. That was fantastic. Ms. Bailey, I will actually, I sent you already some changes to the resolution for you to look at for us to consider. So of course, we're not voting on that today, which is actually what I was saying earlier. I apologize for that. But I will send you some of the ideas I have just to kind of clarify what we're doing a little bit more in the resolution. I appreciate that. And for me, as a mental health substance abuse therapist, I cannot express how important it is for us to stop focusing on a substance and focusing on the disease of addiction for a number of reasons. We've been, quite frankly, focusing on the substance for 30 years, and we haven't moved the ball, you know, and truthfully, focusing on the substance has an equity component to it. Obviously, when the substance was cocaine in freebase form, also called crack cocaine, we had a very different reaction and response to it than we do when the substance is opioids. And part of that is because of who's using the substance. And so that's why there's a number of reasons not to focus on the substance, but the equity issue is one of them as well. So I look forward to having these conversations. And Ms. Bailey, I've already sent you the changes for the resolution, and we can talk about that before our next meeting. Thank you so much, and very good job, Ms. Bailey.
Thank you, Chair Randall. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Supervisor Lusk's hand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Supervisor Bailey as well for her presentation, and I want to acknowledge I've had a couple of recent conversations just talking to some of the principals and some of the teachers here in Fairfax County, and this issue on behavioral health, particularly in the schools, is one that is very, very significant. And obviously we had issues even before the pandemic, but what the pandemic has done is just really exacerbated that. So I think the timing and the importance of this is spot on. So thank you again for this advocacy, and I want to be as engaged as I can in supporting this effort. And then on the second part, on the housing, this is one too. Supervisor Gross and I were just talking about this at the board meeting yesterday. Talking about housing is a very difficult thing in some of our communities, and I'll be perfectly frank that there are so many misperceptions about the folks who are going to be serviced in this housing, and I think we've got to figure better ways to engage our divorce affordable. I mean, what we're talking about is providing housing for people who are working in our community on a daily basis who cannot afford it, and to hear kind of the responses back from the community that this is going to create, crime, this is going to cause people to come in our communities that are, on free and reduced lunch. I mean, it's an amazing set of responses. But I, again, want to, be engaged on this issue as well. And just thank you for bringing that forward.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Lusk. Anyone else from the Commonwealth of Virginia? Supervisor Gross.
Thank you. Something that is not in the resolution, at least I don't see it, is the financial piece, the cost piece. I guess I would call it a capacity piece, because there is something in here that I think that addresses capacity to a certain extent, but maybe needs to have a little bit more oomph, if you will, to address capacity, because that is where we end up. We have good policies in place. We can identify what we need, but sometimes there's not anybody there that can provide the service, or it's so backlogged that it really is a capacity issue. So I'm wondering if there is something, and maybe Chair Randall's edits might cover some of that, but I think there needs to be something in here a little bit more specific about capacity and the funding that may be needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gross. Any comments there? Supervisor Bailey?
Yeah, we did talk about capacity. You're spot on, Supervisor Gross, and it will be more robust. I just didn't have an opportunity to socialize it with your entire committee. So I appreciate your comments and well taken.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else from the Commonwealth of Virginia, so I will insert myself into this opportunity to ask a question. So Supervisor Bailey, figuring out how we reduce the stigma is clearly job one, and there's been great progress in the country with people who are being more open about their own mental health challenges, people who are considered to be role models. We're seeing movement in that direction. But speaking specifically from local governments, we're still, by and large, oriented around providing a public safety police response when people are in mental health crisis. The judicial accompaniments tend to be punitive as opposed to therapeutic. And so I'm just wondering if there's going to be some work that you envision where we kind of come up with some best practices and models that can really be applied across the region, even though they'll have a local flavor that kind of gets us out of that. Like as we understand more that we should destigmatize mental health challenges, our systems tend to just impose punitive reactions to people in mental health crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a very timely and appropriate question in that we are in a time where we have to not only look at the traditional ways of serving our communities, but we also have to look at the piece, and that's why I cited the example of the crisis receiving and stabilization services, because oftentimes people, when they're having an episode, they are incarcerated because of the episode, or a crime is committed because prior to that, their mental health crisis has not been addressed. And so going back to something that Chair Randall was saying, we have to stop focusing on the non-traditional ways of addressing the episode. The crisis stabilization and receiving centers is that way, that future for our jurisdictions, meaning working with our public safety employees, working with our hospitals to offer another entity or another space where an adult or a child can go in and get services. One of the things that we're looking at in Prince William County is having a center, and this is on a smaller scale, but having a center with a 16-bed, 16 recliner for adults, 8-bed, 8 recliner for children. And that's for them to have the space, the time, the service from local professionals to really focus on holistically the person rather than spending that time during an episode going to jail or spending that time during an episode lying on a gurney in the hallway of a hospital that doesn't have a room for you. So I would say to you, from a state perspective, there's been a lot of funding that is being earmarked for behavioral health, and we need to really look at that from a state perspective. How can we get those funds to our jurisdictions to assure that we have a place like a crisis receiving center or enhance our behavioral health services to speak to a person that's coming out of COVID with an episode? I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does, and gives me some thought as to how we might coordinate regionally on this to assure that
Yes.
we have a sufficient level of services throughout our region, because that's clearly an issue for many of us. All right, I want to include members from Maryland in this conversation. Anyone from Maryland?
Mr. Chair, before you move on, if I just very quickly that I would
Yes.
like to offer to my colleagues, one of the things with the Crisis Receiving Center that I did with my Department of Social Services department and stakeholders in the community, I held 3 stakeholders meetings. I received 93 stakeholders in support of the Crisis Receiving Center. The stakeholders were the hospital CEOs, the public safety directors and police chiefs and fire chiefs, community mental health organizations, as well as just the community. 93 stakeholders. I have 2 letters of endorsement, Congressman Connolly, Congressman Whitman, as well as support from our delegation. So I want to offer that model to my colleagues. I'll be willing to share that. It is supposed to be very successful in our last night's legislative meeting, and it's a packet that I can share with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Members from Maryland. And Vice Chair Stewart.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Supervisor Bailey, actually your last comment answered my question, because I was like, how do we get more information on this? And I just want to thank you very much for this presentation. We've been really struggling and looking at how to provide mental health services in our community. And just this has been a great presentation and very useful information. I look forward to getting more from you. So thank you.
Thank you. And moving next, any questions, comments from members from the district? All right, terrific. I think you wanted to make some acknowledgments, Supervisor Bailey, with your last word, so I'll turn it to you for that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'll only take a minute. I want to give you a minute back. I want to thank you, thank my wonderful team, Jennifer Sheeter and Paul. They were just absolutely awesome in helping me set the sessions. I really, really appreciate it. But most of all, I appreciate the participation from my colleagues in support of mental health awareness and stigma. So with that, I yield my minute.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Bailey, and to all of your committee and to staff for supporting this great work. Our last item of the day will be on transportation electrification opportunities, and we will be joined today by COG's Climate, Energy, and Air Program Director, Jeff King, who will brief us on COG's efforts and opportunities for regional collaboration as we look at transitioning to electric vehicles in our municipal fleets. So, are you ready, Mr. King?
Yes, sir.
All right, take it away.
And I guess, Monica, if you could pull up the presentation. So thank you, Vice Chair Dorsey and members of the board. Good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, I'm Jeff King. I serve as the Director of the Climate, Energy, Air Program at COG. And as we move toward climate program implementation, after our extensive planning effort in 2020, today I'll provide you a brief overview of several opportunities for local and regional climate action in the transportation sector, particularly around vehicle electrification. And I should say, while my team's main area of focus in recent years has been around electrification, we are keenly aware of other opportunities in this sector. As you heard earlier from the ConnectedDMV folks, hydrogen may have an important role in the longer term, as well as solutions that are being looked at, such as renewable natural gas. So Monica, if you can move to the next slide. So this slide's got a lot of information in it, but it's depicting the results of an analysis done for the region's 2030 climate plan. And specifically, it's looking at the potential emission reduction impact of strategies and actions that were included in the plan that could be implemented this decade to meet our aggressive 50% reduction goal by 2030. As you can see in the chart, and we've circled in 2 locations there in the blue, the transition to zero emission vehicles represents the 3rd highest potential for achieving greenhouse gas emission reductions in the plan. Certainly as part of an integrated multi-sector approach to addressing climate change, we'll need to address emissions from the grid and the built environment as well. So the slices above that blue there in the orange and the red. But today we'll focus specifically in on the opportunities for transportation. And I should say that this sector represents about 40% of the total emission of greenhouse gases in the region. Next slide. So this slide presents the 3 strategies that were included in the 2030 climate plan on zero emission vehicles, or otherwise known as ZEVs. The first strategy recommendation focuses on light duty fleets and our desire to expand ZEVs in that sector. The second looks to accelerate electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles. And I think in this case, along the lines of buses probably first, but over time, some of the other larger vehicles used in our municipalities. And finally, the third focuses on one of the key, I guess you'd say, key enabler of a successful transition, specifically the build out of the system we'll need to support charging of electric vehicles. So now I'll turn to speaking to three specific near-term opportunities for all members in our region to take on these three strategies. So opportunity number one, we've had a consultant team, ICF Consulting out of Fairfax, has won a contract with COG, and it provides fairly broad scope to support both climate, energy, and electric vehicle planning for the region. They have a clean transportation team that's under contract with us, and they've been supporting both COG and our local government members for a number of years now. But recently there's been conversation, and probably for the last 6 months or so, Conti and I and others have been working along the notion that we may have some opportunities for coordinating that planning. At this point, we've had kind of some one-offs, but we see there are certain common regional elements that we could probably, take care of in a planning effort more at the regional scale, and then find a way to get some economies of scale to do some more specific local site-specific planning. And for examples there, I can mention Prince George's County, where we've been helping the county not only with their climate plan, but also with their green fleet plan and their electrification opportunities, both for light duty fleets as well as their transit buses. And that was just really for government operations, but they had expressed some interest in partnering with other jurisdictions in the region as they move towards thinking about what they can do for the community. Likewise, as we speak, quite literally today, we're working with Frederick County on the idea of doing exactly this concept of coordinating both the local and regional elements of it. We're dealing with the scope of work, trying to price that out. So this would be an opportunity to share that scope with your staff and see if there's interest in funding some collaborative efforts there. Move on to the next slide. Another opportunity. There's a lot of excitement and interest in the last year on electrification of both transit buses and school buses. There's significant funding available currently, even before the infrastructure bill. The FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, Dominion Energy in Virginia, the VW settlement are just some examples of that. And we're seeing that with some pilot programs being done in the region, there's been a lot of interest in sharing. We've held several forums and doing some ride and drive. So I think this is an area, to the extent that you're interested in your jurisdiction manages both either a school bus fleet or a transit bus fleet, you may look to that. And I gave some examples there. Frederick County, probably the first out of the box, doing some electrification of transit buses. DC Circulators doing a lot of good work on it. And some really neat stories out of Fairfax County, Montgomery County Public Schools on their interest in electric school buses. And so the final slide. The last piece here would be there are several opportunities for local governments to partner to deploy the charging equipment that's needed for vehicles. There's a very large Mid-Atlantic Electric Vehicle Partnership, which is a Department of Energy grant. As part of that grant, they have the ability to deploy charging systems in our region at no cost to the locality. What they're in need of is the real estate. So there have been some interest in looking at government site locations. I think, and I should mention that the utilities also, particularly in Maryland, have authorization to fund and deploy charging systems, but they also need real estate. So folks have been looking at parking garages, government buildings. As part of our work for Prince George's County, we went to every government facility in the county and looked at the available circuits and how far they were to available parking in the lot. So, that kind of a site assessment, understanding, what the opportunities are to place charging systems on government property. And for both those programs, they would need to be publicly accessible. So there's definitely some interest in sorting out, the right-of-way access and those kinds of agreements that would be needed to make that happen. And again, some examples: Prince George's County is working with PEPCO to get some chargers deployed, and I know the city of Laurel just recently met to go over all their different opportunities there in the city to get some free chargers from the Mid-Atlantic EV Partnership. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions and certainly encourage you to discuss these opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. King. We appreciate it greatly. We'll move to questions and conversation first from members of the district. And give me a minute while the slide presentation is up. I cannot see everyone, so someone from the district just pop in if you need to. All right, seeing none, we'll move next to members from Maryland. Vice Chair Stewart.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. King, for that presentation. And I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but one of the things that we were successful in Tacoma Park was assisting a traditional gas station to move from gas to being an EV charging station. So that's just another thing. And we did it through grants through the state of Maryland and provided the assistance to the owner of the gas station. So just another item to add to the list of things that could possibly be done.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Anyone else from Maryland?
Craig Moe from Laurel, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Craig.
I just want to acknowledge Mr. King and thank him for his work in supporting Laurel's efforts. We have a long ways to go, but I like that word free. So we're trying to do that as much as possible for infrastructure and others. So again, thank you very much for what you and your staff have been doing to help us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moe. All right, anyone else from Maryland? If not, we will move to members from Virginia. I'll start us off, Mr. King. So a lot of us are engaging in these innovative arrangements to get kind of the end products, whether it be the vehicles or the chargers, and realizing there's a lot of opportunity to grow there. Where are we in the region in terms of the underlying infrastructure, such as the transmission lines and the reliability of grids to deliver that power sufficiently and also in a secure way? Are we doing any kind of similar work to assess our capacity in that area?
No doubt the electric utilities, Dominion and PEPCO in particular, are actively looking at that. I think it kind of depends on the circuit. I think for the most part, and I should say, it's interesting. I've had some conversations with Dominion. They have what they call a kind of a solar mapping tool that shows which circuits in their entire territory are good circuits to be looking at for deployment of solar power. And had a similar conversation with folks at PEPCO, and the idea of can we work with them to look at parts of the grid that would be really favorable for electric vehicle charging, and where additional investment would be needed. I think the bigger challenge, the opportunity in the grand scheme of things would be to decarbonize the grid, so that as we're charging our vehicles using grid power, we're not creating kind of new emissions in a different location. So that's going to be a big opportunity. And I think the bigger challenges tend to be around the DC fast charging. There's different levels of charging infrastructure. The level 1 and level 2, kind of like a home, plug in your home, or like your dryer in your basement, versus the DC fast charge, which requires quite a bit of capacity. In some cases, you're talking like the capacity of a commercial building associated with that. So there, I think that it's not so much concern on the grid side as it is on the company deploying the infrastructure side, given some of the cost hurdles they may face for things like capacity charge and demand charge. It can get very expensive to get that extra capacity from the grid. So the utility may be able to provide it, but there are some kind of structural and financial barriers there that may need to be addressed.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from members from Virginia? All right, with that, I will thank you very much, Mr. King. We will follow closely a line of work that's going to evolve and hopefully further evolve to meet the needs of everyone in the community, many of whom have already set ambitious goals consistent with or even exceeding what we've done on the regional level here at COG. So thank you very much for that. And at this point, I'd like to entertain any requests for other business. Seeing and hearing none, it is my pleasure to give everyone 13 minutes back to their afternoon, and thank you all for joining today's COG Board of Directors meeting. Remember, we do not have a regular meeting in December, but instead we'll have our in-person annual meeting where we will also have our awards luncheon scheduled on December 8th. With that all, I hope to see you there, and I'll entertain gladly a motion to adjourn.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
So moved, and hearing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.